Hi everyone, welcome back to our React 19 Plus Laravel 12 Full Stack Masterclass. I'm Umesh Rana, and in the last video, we finished setting up our React project with Vite and Bun. Now, before we start coding real projects, it is super important to understand React deeply, what it is, how it works behind the scenes, and why we even use it. So in today's video, we will learn everything from the very basics like what is React, why React is so popular, DOM versus virtual DOM, how React works behind the scene. Also, we will take a closer look to the React project folder. Then we will understand JSX. Further, we will see components and data flow between components. And then lastly, we will check out React lifecycles. Alright, first, what exactly is React? So React is a JavaScript library that helps us build user interfaces. Basically, the part of the website users can see and interact with. Now, what do you mean by JavaScript library? So React is a library, not a framework. That means React only focuses on one thing, the front-end UI. It does not control your backend, routing, or data fetching. For that, we use other libraries with React. Now, in other hand, if we'll talk about Angular and Vue, these are the frameworks of JavaScript, which will control routing and data fetching everything inbuilt. React is component-based. So you can imagine your website as a house, and instead of building the whole house at once, you build it using a small reusable blocks, just like firstly you will build walls, then you will build doors, windows, and same in React. We build a small reusable components like buttons, cards, or forms, and then combine them to make full pages. React is declarative. That means you just tell React what you want on the screen and React decides how to update it. So instead of manually changing HTML elements, React takes care of it smartly. And this is built by Meta, okay? And this helps build reusable UI parts which called components. And by using React, we can make web application, mobile application fast, simple, and dynamic. Now, why React is so popular? So React did not just become popular overnight. It earned its reputation because of how simple, efficient, and developer-friendly it is. Let's understand why developers across the world and companies like Meta, Netflix, Instagram, and Airbnb rely on React. The first thing is its architecture. This is simple and easy to learn. And this provides component-based architecture. So before React, developers used to write very big files of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, everything mixed together. Then React changed this with the idea of components. So the component is a small reusable building blocks. And you can imagine your web page is just like a Lego house. And each block, just like header, navbar, card, footer, button, these all are a separate component. And you can use the same button component in 10 different places. And if you change it once, it updates everywhere together. So that saves a lot of time and keeps your UI consistent across your application. Now in the resultant, this code becomes modular, clean, and easier to maintain. Next, we have virtual DOM. This is super fast updates. So in traditional JavaScript, every time something changes, like typing in an input box, the browser updates the entire part of the page. That is slow because of re-rendering, especially when your page has many elements. So React uses a virtual DOM, which is like a smart copy of the real DOM in memory. So that I will discuss in the next slide. Further, we have this component-based architecture. So the component-based architecture will provide a modular UI that we can write once and we can reuse anywhere in our application. Further, the React handles UI updates efficiently so that when the data changes, it will just apply that change in the DOM and it will render that part of the change only. And also this has huge ecosystem and community. So React has one of the biggest developer communities in the world. No matter what you are building, there is already a package, a tutorial, or a solution available. So you get access to tools like React Router, Redux, Next.js, React Query, and so on. React is maintained by Meta, so it is reliable, well tested, and constantly updated, and you can trust that it won't disappear or become outdated suddenly. And one more benefit is React is not just for websites. You can use the same concept for mobile application using React Native, desktop application, and even VR applications as well. Now let's talk about what is DOM. Because React's magic starts there. So DOM means Document Object Model. It is like a tree that represents your HTML structure inside the browser. So in this screenshot, we have this root HTML element. From there, we have head, title, and then we can put the title. And in the body, we have h1, and then in that h1 we have this text as my header. Further, we can include a script as well in the body. So this is the hierarchy of DOM representation in the browser. So this is basically HTML node. Okay. So when the browser reads this HTML, it builds this tree structure in memory, that is the DOM. Now before React, we used to change the DOM manually using JavaScript. So that is fine for small websites, but just imagine a big application with thousands of elements, and updating each element manually becomes very confusing and slow. You will easily make mistakes and the performance goes down. So that is why React introduced a smarter way called virtual DOM. Now let's understand what is virtual DOM. So you can think of virtual DOM as a copy of the real DOM that lives inside React's memory. And here is how React works step by step. So React first creates a virtual version of your page, that is a lightweight JavaScript copy. And whenever your data or state changes, React builds a new virtual DOM tree using that original DOM. And next, this compares the new tree, that means the new copy, with the old one, and this is called diffing. Then React updates only the parts that actually changed in the real DOM, and this step is called reconciliation. So this is a very important concept in React, like how React works, and in many of the interviews these questions can be asked. What is reconciliation, or even how React works behind the scene? So instead of changing the entire page, React only updates what is needed, which will make your application super fast. Now let's understand this using one example. So let's say your page shows a counter and a list of 1000 items. Okay. And when you click to increase the counter, React will update only that number, not the whole list. So that is the power of virtual DOM. It is for better performance and a smoother UI, and we understood how React works behind the scene. Now let's understand what is JSX. JSX, which you will see in almost every React file. So JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It lets you write HTML like syntax directly inside JavaScript. So simply you can say like in JavaScript, you are writing HTML. Okay. So you can simply say that in JavaScript, this allows you to write HTML directly. And in syntax, this looks like HTML, but behind the scenes, React converts it into normal JavaScript code. Okay. But by using JSX, this will make your code simple and clear. So we will dig deeper this JSX part when we will start writing component code. Okay. Now let's understand what is component. because we already discussed React is for creating UI and components. So a component is just like a small building block of your application, and it is basically a JavaScript function that will return JSX, and we already saw this JSX syntax, right? So from the JavaScript function, this will return this JSX part, means it could be anything inside this return function. So let's say if you have one web page in which you have header layout, navigation area, sidebar, section, article, and the footer part, these all are the components. And by including these all components, this will create an entire web page. So each components can have its own HTML, that means JSX that we already discussed. And also this can have CSS or a styling for designing that specific UI. So let's say in this header, we have a separate component and there will have a separate CSS for styling that header area only. So regarding the component, we will dig deeper into our upcoming episodes, because in React, everything will be component and mostly we will be working on the components. Next, we will discuss about types of components. So in React, we have two types of component, the functional components and class components. So the functional components are modern JavaScript function which will return JSX syntax, okay? And this will support React hooks like useState, useEffect. So these we will see in the upcoming episodes, because this is our basic React episode, okay? And the second one is the class components, that is the older one, which use JavaScript ES6 class-based methods. And nowadays, this class component is mostly replaced by the functional component. Now let's quickly discuss about data flow between components. So React follows a one-way data flow, that means parent to child. And in order to communicate between the multiple components, React provides props. So this props is basically properties, or you can say attributes, okay, which will be used to communicate and pass data between the components. So on the React component, I will create a separate video in which we will see what is component, how we can create component, the component life cycles, and passing data between the components. Now before we wrap up, let's quickly understand how React actually works. And in the previous video, we already installed React 19 using Vite and Bun, right? So I will quickly jump to that application setup. And here we have this React 19 setup. So firstly, let's recap this project folder structure. In the last video, we already discussed about this, but let's recap again. So here we have this index.html, which is the entry point of this React application. Here, this is the single HTML file in which all the components will be rendered. I'm just explaining it again because we discussed about DOM, virtual DOM, and components thing, right? So that's why again I'm just recalling these all points, okay? Now in order to go ahead, let me start this application first. So I will type bun dev command because I have installed this React 19 using Bun. But if you are using Node, then you will have to run npm run dev, or in case if you are using Yarn, you will have to run yarn dev command. Okay, so let's go ahead with this bun dev, and this has started running this React 19 application using Vite, and this has created this URL as localhost and the port is 5173. Let's access this port on the browser. So I will type localhost 5173 port. And here we updated this component in the last video. So let's go ahead with this folder structure again. So when we accessed that URL in the browser as localhost 5173 port, that executed this index.html. How? Let's come back to the browser again. And I will open the developer console by clicking on inspect. And here I will check out this DOM, that is basically the element which is representing this web page. Okay. So inside this, we have this HTML head, body, and inside this body tag, we have this div. Let me zoom in this screen. Okay. Inside this body tag, we have one div having ID as root. And inside this div having root ID is rendering one h1 element, right? In which we have this message displaying as, hey, this is app component. And further we have this a script, right? So this HTML is rendering from here. And inside this, we have this single div with ID root. And in this div element, all the React components will be rendered. So let's understand how React will render all the components or HTML in a single div. So in order to understand this, here, if we'll jump to the next line, this is one script rendering as main.jsx, which is included inside this index.html. That means a single script has been included in this. So let's check out this main.jsx file again. So this main.jsx file is inside src, which is source that we already discussed, right? So inside this, we have this main.jsx. Now inside this main.jsx, this is basically component. Now inside this main component, this is basically finding that div which is having ID as root. So this root is basically ID of this div here, right? So from this main component, basically this is JavaScript, okay? So from this main component, this is just finding that div with ID root, and this is rendering one component which is app component. Now in order to understand this, let me just simplify these all things. So what I will do, instead of rendering this app component, because currently we are not much familiar with the components, right? So if you are confused, let me just comment this, and here I will just render one HTML, because we are inside this document.getElementById, and this is finding that div, and on this div, this will render something which will be written here. So now let's say if I will write something like h1, hey, this is our component. Now if we'll navigate to the browser, and yeah, we can see this is rendering the HTML. Now we can change this like from React, and if we'll check out, yes, this has been rendered. So the flow is very simple. React is just picking all the HTML like JavaScript from the other files, and this is rendering to this div which is having ID as root. So now if we'll check out this app component, this is basically one JavaScript file having HTML. So if we'll navigate to this app component, this is imported from app.jsx, which is inside same src folder. So let's jump to the app component, which is app.jsx again. Okay. Inside this, we have one JavaScript function. This is a basic function that is returning one HTML. So that's why it is called component, because from this JavaScript function, we are returning HTML. So from here, we can return anything like any UI blocks like header, footer, sidebar, navigation. Okay. So that we will discuss in the upcoming episodes. So from here, we have just created the simple function, and this is exporting this function so that in JavaScript, we can import that function or component outside that particular file. Now let's say if I will change this function to something else, just like I will change this to header. And when I have changed this to header, we will have to return the same function from here. Now, in order to check whether it is rendering correctly, I will navigate back to main component, and from here, I will just enable this app component rendering, and let's comment this h1 because at a time we can render only one element here. So from here I have rendered app component. Now if we'll check out to the browser, and yes, this has rendered that app component. Now let's understand this again. So from this app component, we have returned this heading, and that is named as header component, right? Here we have the function as header, but in the main component, we have imported as app. So this is just a name. This won't impact what we are returning from this app component. The file name is app basically, but inside this app, we have the function as header. So from here, we are returning header, but while importing that, we have captured it using app. So now let's say if I will change this to header, then here we will have to change this to header, else it will throw error. In the browser, it has not rendered anything, but if we'll check out to the console, this said app is not defined. So accordingly, you will have to update it here. Now we have changed this to header, and if we'll check out to the browser, yes, that HTML has been rendered again. So we understood this is the index.html, which is the entry point of React application. From here, we have this main.jsx. Now it can be anything, like if you want to change this main.jsx to index.jsx or something, you can update it, and accordingly you will have to change it here. Now inside this src folder, we will have all the components and services or hooks which we will define it here for creating our React application. So every files will be kept inside this source folder itself. Here we will organize our folder structure, okay, based on the application needs. So we understood how React works behind the scene, from where it starts running, right? Now before we end, let's answer a few common beginner questions. Just like, am I changing HTML directly in React? No, React handles all DOM changes automatically. You won't have to change manually anything. Now one more questions you might be thinking, like where to write CSS. So respective to every component, we can create a separate CSS file, or even we can add inline CSS, internal CSS. We can use any CSS libraries or frameworks, just like Bootstrap, Tailwind CSS, Material UI, Flux UI, okay? So that we will cover all these in upcoming episodes when we will build real world projects. Now one more question, like should I learn class component? This is not necessary now because modern React uses functional components, okay? So that again we will discuss in the upcoming episodes. Alright, so let's wrap up what we learned today. We understood what React is and why it is so popular. We explored how the DOM and virtual DOM work behind the scenes. We learned what JSX is and why it makes writing UI easier. And we also understood how React starts up its folder structure and entry files. So now you have got a strong foundation to move ahead confidently. Now in the next episode, we will start the real magic of React, in which we will dive deep into components and we will see how to create them, how to render them, how to communicate between components, how to pass data through props, and how React manages their life cycles. So that episode will make everything crystal clear and you will finally see React in action. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your questions below. I read all of them and try to answer in upcoming videos. So thanks a lot for watching. I will see you in the next one. Until then, happy coding.